Hi everybody, this is Dr. Fouladian and we're going to start chapter 13 regarding neural tissue. So as an introduction, the nervous system controls and adjusts the activity of the body. It's like the headquarters, right? If our nervous system is not working, our body cannot do any function. So it provides swift but brief responses. It is like a wiring system over the body that we have one part in the center and it sends some wires all around, and by that one provides some responses that are very fast, swift, and at the same time very brief, right? It compares the nervous system to the endocrine system. So when we compare these two systems, these are two main systems that are controlling the activity of the body. It is like having two CEOs that they are working separately and at the same time they are related to each other. Then work together, they work perfectly and they can manage the whole system completely. Nervous system acts fast and it can send the orders to the long distance through all those wires that later we talk about, that we call them nerves. On the other hand, endocrine system, it may not act very fast because it has to send those signals through the blood vessels so that they can reach their target organs and submit the message in person. That it's like a postman, they have that to take the mail and just submit it in by hand, right? That's the job of the endocrine system. But they do their work precisely and they can reach to many different target organs at the same time, right? So that's the main differences between the two systems, and at the same time both of them are controlling the activities in different ways. Now, talking about the nervous system, we have two main parts of the nervous system: central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system, or CNS, associated with the brain and the spinal cord. So these are two parts of the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord. Then we have peripheral nervous system, PNS. Peripheral means on the periphery, surrounding, not in the center, right? So those PNS, that PNS part associated with the tissue outside of the CNS. Here in this picture, you see all parts of the nervous system. You see the central nervous system as we have brain, and in continuation of that, we have the spinal cord here. Then you see the peripheral nervous system that includes all the nerves that are coming out of the central nervous system. Some nerves are coming out of the brain. We call them cranial nerves. You remember, cranium is the part that the brain is located inside, right? So we have cranial nerves, the nerves that are coming out of the brain. We have all the spinal nerves, all the nerves that are coming out of the spinal cord. All of them are making the peripheral nerves. So regarding the central nervous system, the jobs of the central nervous system is responsible for integrating, processing, and coordinating sensory inputs. So to have this job of organizing the whole body, it needs to first get some information from around. So those are all sensory input. We have some receptors that they are detecting the senses. Like for example, eye is a receptor, right? Is an organ that has some receptor inside that can detect the light and then make the image out of that at the end, right? So those sensory input are going through some parts to get into the central nervous system. Now in the central nervous system we have some information, right? Then central nervous system is responsible for integrating, processing, and coordinating of motor output, right? So after processing inside of the nervous system, those sensory information that have been come into the central nervous system, inside of the nervous system, it processes that, right? It's like a CPU of the computer. You give it the information, it processes that, and it gives you an action, right? That's the same exactly with the body. That's the main model of all the computers, right? Our central nervous system. So after processing of them, it sends a signal out. And that output is a motor. Is a motor means that it has to do some action, right? Later we're going to talk about that, what type of action it might be. And it is a seat for the intelligence, memory, learning, and emotion. These are all the things that making us and some other creatures different from the lower creatures. Intelligence, memory, learning, and emotion. In one word, that's our brain that makes us a human, different from other creatures, right? Some of these ones might be very similar with the other creatures. It might be a slight difference with like at least a few of the other creatures, but that slight difference goes a long way, right? So peripheral nervous system. What's the function of the peripheral nervous system, PNS? It provides sensory information to the central nervous system. So all those information that are going to come to the central nervous system, they are all have to travel through the peripheral nervous system, through all those wirings, all those nerves that come from all peripheries surrounding of the body, and they bring the sensory information into their CNS. And also, after processing inside of the CNS, those peripheral nervous system, those nerves are the ones that are carrying motor commands away from the central nervous system to the periphery of the body, to the related part that they have to do the action, right? Now, peripheral nervous system have several parts. It can be divided into afferent division and efferent division. So that's a good time to learn the difference between afferent and efferent, because sometimes it makes a confusion because they seem very similar in the wording, right? So that's good to learn it right now and just remember it to the rest of your life, right? So afferent division. The afferent division is the part that brings sensory information to the CNS, right? In general, afferent is not limited just to the peripheral nervous system and to the nerves. Whenever you have a structure, let me show you, like for example, it applies, for example, to a lymph node. If you have a lymph node like this, right, there may be some vessels that bring the material toward the lymph node, right? We call those ones as afferent. So whenever you have a part that brings the material inside of a structure, we call it afferent. From that lymph node, we have other vessels that taking the material out of that, away from that. So this was called the one that bringing this is called afferent. When another vessel or structure takes the material out of that, we call that one efferent. As you see, the difference in the wording is just between the first A or E, right? So the same way is here. Another example for this one before going back to the brain, to the nervous system, like in the kidney. When we go to the kidney and the urinary system, you will see that inside of the urinary system, we have a tuft of capillary that we call it glomerulus. So for that glomerulus, this is one vessel that brings the blood into that glomerulus. We call that afferent. And that's an arterial. Before capillary, we have arterial, right? So we call the one that bring the blood into the tuft of capillary or the glomerulus, we call that afferent arterial. And then after the tuft of capillary, there is another arteriole that takes the blood out of that glomerulus. We call that second one as efferent artery. As you see, we have these afferent and efferent in different parts of the body. The same is here for the peripheral nervous system. We have some neurons that bring in the sensation toward the center. So if we're talking about like these things, the same way that we had a lymph node, now we're talking about the central nervous system. When we have nerves that all together composed of neurons. So all those ones bringing the part that bringing the information and senses toward the brain, those are all the afferent division. Then from the central nervous system, we have other parts of the peripheral nervous system that taking the commands out of the central nervous system. Those are called efferent divisions. So in other words, sensory neurons are part of afferent divisions. Motor neurons are part of the efferent divisions, right? So these are equal to each other. Sensory, afferent, motor, efferent. Don't forget about these ones, right? And as you see here, those motor commands, they may go to the muscles and they do some action. If it is skeletal muscles, what they do moving parts of the body, right? Because they contract in the skeletal muscles. If they go to the other muscles, cardiac muscle, what they do? They contract the cardiac muscles and pumps the blood. If they go to the smooth muscle, they contract the smooth muscle and they move part of the body inside the viscera, right? Like around wall of the small intestine. When the smooth muscle contract, what they do? They make the material move inside of the small intestine. The blood vessels, the wall of the blood vessel have a smooth muscle. When they contract, what they do? They make the blood inside to move. All other viscera, we don't want to go over them one by one. All the muscle, smooth muscle around the viscera, when they contract, they move, they cause the material or parts of the body to move, right? And the other one are glands. For the glands also, when the signal sends to them a motor response, a command sends to them to do an action, what's the action? Secretion of some matter, right? So here in this picture, you see many of the things that we just discussed. Here you see that we have the central nervous system here, CNS, that includes the brain and spinal cord. Then we have the peripheral nervous system that includes the afferent and efferent division. So you see that in the central nervous system, the information is processed. In the peripheral nervous system, we have one afferent division that bringing the sense toward the central nervous system, and they are sensory. We have the efferent divisions that bring the commands and motor commands from the central nervous system toward the periphery, the motor part, right? So pay attention that for the afferent part, we have some receptors as we see here, down here, these receptors are the ones that are detecting and receiving the sensory information, right? We have several types of the receptors as we see here. First, let's start from this last word, somatic sensory receptors. So these are sensory receptors that bring the senses from all over the body, right? They are making the general sensation that is not specific to one specific part of the body. We have it all over around the body, right? So we call it somatic sensory receptors, such as what? They are monitoring skeletal muscles. So the sensation part of the skeletal muscle. In the skeletal muscle, besides the muscle fiber that they have, they do the motor action, they contract, they get short and they move. We have some sensory receptors that they detect the sensation, the situations, for example, of the skeletal muscle, even the situations of the body in the space. All those sensory parts are part of the somatic sensory receptors. In the joints also we have some parts of those sensations regarding the sensation of the spatial positions of the body, right? The situation of whole body, that those are the ones that gives the body the information that am I standing, am I sitting, am I lying down, all those things partly come from the muscles, from the joints and other things. We have a skin surface, we have receptors in the skin surface that they are providing position sense and touch, pressure, pain, temperature, sensation. All of these are part of the somatic sensory receptors. Then we have some, besides those somatic sensory ones, we have some special sensory receptors. Those are the ones that provide sensation of smell, taste, vision, balance, and hearing, right? And we have a special organs for them. It's not all over the body. Like for the vision, we have eye. For the balance and hearing, we have ear. For the taste, we have tongue, right? And for the smell, we have nose. So these are a special sensory receptors. So these were around the body, but about inside of the body. For inside of the body, we have visceral sensory receptors that they monitor internal organs, including those of the cardiovascular system, respiratory system, digestive system, urinary system, and reproductive system. We have some receptors over there, and finally, each one of these receptors, somatic sensation, special sensation, and visceral sensation, they have some sensory neurons that they bring their signals through the afferent division toward the central nervous system, brain, and spinal cord. So far, so good. Now, information is processed inside of the central nervous system, now goes to the different division to do an action, right? The motor part. Now, in the motor parts, we have two parts. We have somatic nervous system and we have autonomic nervous system. Pay attention, we're talking about the motor part, right? Somatic efferent part is the skeletal muscles, right? When we talk about the somatic, soma means body, right? So the somatic motor part of the body, they are skeletal muscles. So those skeletal muscles are the ones that when a signal comes to them through all those neurons, motor neurons, they are doing one action. And what is the action? The skeletal muscle, what does it do? It just contracts, gets short, and moves parts of the body in the somatic area, in the outer part of the body, right? What about the autonomic nervous system? Autonomic parts of the motor nervous system or the autonomic nervous system is divided to two parts by itself. sympathetic division and parasympathetic division. We are going to talk about these two in complete sense later, what is sympathetic, what is parasympathetic, but these are the parts that these are part of the autonomy. When we say autonomy, it means that they are done by themselves. They do not need us to think about that and decide about them. They are done automatically, right? They get some senses and they respond accordingly, right? So we have sympathetic division and parasympathetic divisions, and these two together, they are controlling the function and the motor part and action of the smooth muscles, cardiac muscles, and glands, right? So as you see, skeletal muscles is the motor part related to the somatic nervous system, and all the other muscles and glands are related to the autonomic nervous system. And pay attention, all these ones that are doing the action, the motor response at the end, are called effectors, right? Compared to the receptors that we had at the beginning, they were detecting the sensation. So this is a good diagram that is showing almost the whole complete big picture of the central nervous system and how they are working together. Now, reviewing all those ones, the peripheral nervous system, or PNS, can be further subdivided into afferent and efferent, and now we know that afferent can be further subdivided into somatic and visceral. We said that we have for the somatic, we have the somatic sensation, we have the special sensation, and also then we have the visceral sensation. So regarding this definition, just refer to the picture that I showed you. That one is more complete and precise and more detailed. Then regarding the efferent, we said that can be further subdivided into the somatic nerves and autonomic nerves, and autonomic nerves can be further subdivided into sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves. Now for the afferent, in more detail, we have somatic portion that monitors skeletal muscles, joints, and skin surfaces. This is talking about the somatic sensation, right? Then we have visceral sensation that monitors smooth muscle, cardiac muscles, and other internal organs regarding their sensation, the sensory part of them, right? All of these muscles, as we discussed, besides the motor part, have some sensation too. And here in the afferent part hadn't been mentioned a special sensation that you already know those are part of the afferent system. And for the efferent system, the somatic nerves, they control skeletal muscles and the skeletal muscle contraction that they do action, and autonomic nerves control internal organ activities, as we discussed, include the activities of the smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. Now here you see the same picture regarding the central nervous system and part of the peripheral nervous system. As we see, central nervous system includes brain and spinal cord and contain control centers responsible for the processing and integrating sensory information, planning and coordinating responses to stimuli, and provide control over the activities of other systems, right? These are the CPU, right? These are processors that they are controlling all the activities. And then peripheral nervous system, those are neural tissues outside the CNS whose function is to link the central nervous system with the sense organs and other systems. So they bring in the sensation and then taking away the messages, right, and the motor actions. And part of the peripheral nervous system are autonomic nervous system, that they are components of the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system that are concerned with the control of the visceral function. So pay attention that for autonomic nervous system, so we call them autonomic because they do autonomic, right? And they do not need our conscious control to decide about the things, right? And pay attention that parts of the central nervous system also is included, like for example, if you're talking about those, for example, nerves, they start from inside of the spinal cord. Some part of them start from inside of the brain. So part of the CNS also is included in the autonomic nervous system. They have some parts of the CNS and PNS altogether. But later we're going to talk about the autonomic nervous system in more detail. But just here, we have that autonomic nervous system has two parts, parasympathetic and sympathetic. Parasympathetic nerves, for example, just some examples of their function. It can cause, parasympathetic part can cause pupil constriction, makes the pupil to get smaller, right? Decrease the heart rate, and tense the urinary bladder, for example, so that it is the urination, right? So this is some examples of the parasympathetic action. Sympathetic nerves, on the other hand, they may cause pupil dilation. The pupils get bigger, increasing of the heart rate, relaxing of the urinary bladder so that you can keep it for a while. Do not let it go, right? So these are just some examples that how these two systems are working, and these are all serving. Later we are going to talk about all these ones in detail, how they are doing and why they are doing that and all those ones. But just in general, sympathetic nervous system is serving the fight or flight situation of the body. In the emergency, in a situation that body needs to do a rapid action response, we need more muscle activity, for example, increasing heart rate, we have some emotion, we have to respond to that. All those ones are those related to the sympathetic nervous system. And parasympathetic nervous system are the ones that is after event, after an earthquake, right, God forbidden, that everything is calm now. Now we can relax, we can have a lower heartbeat, we can just sit, rest, and digest, right? All those. So we're going to talk about all these ones later in more detail, but just for now, know these examples of each one of them. Now, after this brief explanation regarding the whole picture of the nervous system, let's go over more detail. Getting back to the level of the organizations. You remember, each system is composed of some organs. So, for the nervous system, the organs that we have the brain is an organ, spinal cord is an organ. Both of these are making the central nervous system. The nerves are other organs. All those wiring that you see that coming out of the CNS, we call them nerve. That later we see that they are all collections of some cells, right? So those nerves are other organs. Now, each organ is composed of some tissues, right? The main tissue that we have in any of these organs of the central nervous system, they are mostly nervous tissue. That is the main part of our discussion in this chapter, right? But always pay attention, in any organ, it is not that we have only one type of the tissue. Like for example, in the brain, it needs some blood supply, right? We have blood vessel, and you already know the structure of the blood vessel. On each blood vessel, we have some endothelium, epithelial tissue. We have some muscles, a smooth muscle. We have some connective tissue, and all those ones, right? So all these ones are making together, all these types of the tissue are making each one of those organs, brain, spinal cord, nerves, and all, right? But now we're going to talk about specifically about the neural tissue, right? Because most of any of those organs in the nervous system are composed of neural tissue besides other tissues. Now, in the neural tissue, We want to see what type of the cells we have specific. So talking about the cellular level, we have two types of the cell in the neural tissue. We have neurons and we have neuroglia. Let's see what are they. For the neurons, those are the nerve cells that are responsible for the transfer and processing of information in the nervous system. So these are the ones that we have seen under the microscope, and we're going to talk about them more here. They have a soma or cell body. Soma means body, right? So we call it a cell body, soma or cell body. They have a long process, we call it axon. They have some more smaller processes, we call them dendrite. We go over these ones all in detail. In general, the neurons are the ones that are responsible for the transfer and processing of information. So they are transferring a message that we call them nerve impulse or action potential. That's the main job of the neurons, and that's what it makes them different from the other cells that we have here, and we call them neuroglia. As we discussed, that's the main job of the whole nervous system too, to sense the signals from one part of the body to another part of the body very fast, right? So these neurons are doing the main job of the nervous system, transferring of the signals and messages and impulses, or in one word, action potentials, right? What about the neuroglia? Neuroglia are not transferring the information, they're not transferring the message, but they are supporting cells. They protect the neurons. It doesn't mean that their job is less important than the neurons, because if neuroglia they do not do their functions properly, after a while the neurons will die. If the supporting system is not working well, the neurons cannot survive longer, right? So they cannot do their jobs, right? So neuroglia have important role, but in other way. They are supporting cells and protecting the neurons. So functions of the neuroglia.